Hello and welcome to the Tending Creativity podcast. My name is Marissa and I'm the host. And this is a podcast about creativity, art, and it focuses on the experiences of marginalized genders. And so I alternate between interviews with artists about their work and their life, and then also just solo episodes talking about my experiences and other topics relating to all of that. So today is going to be a solo episode, and today I wanted to talk about a few different things. The first thing is something which is super amazing, which was getting my work published by the LA Times. And also like what I noticed about myself and my relationship to my art through that experience. And then I have some queer media recommendations at the end. Okay, so like I said, I had my art published by the LA Times this past week, which is super amazing and I'm super happy about it and I'm proud of myself. It was a comic that I made about going to Ciudad Juarez in Mexico with my husband for his immigrant visa interview at the U.S. consulate, the United States consulate. If you're unfamiliar, basically many people who immigrate to the United States from Mexico and who are applying for a visa have to go through the whole immigration process, of course, of submitting paperwork, paying fees, etc., and meet certain qualifications. And depending on your case, you may have to go outside of the United States to have your final in-person interview with an immigration officer at the consulate in Mexico. And Juarez is where it's located now. I believe that they used to have more than one location, but I don't remember what year they made that like the actual pretty much single location in Mexico where interviews happen. And Juarez is a border town with El Paso, Texas, if you're not aware. So my husband and I have been going through this process for him since 2018 when we got married. And finally this year, 2022, in March, we were notified that his interview was scheduled for April. And it was crazy because we had a very short notice, like under 2 weeks. And at that point, we kind of like really weren't sure when to expect it to come because it had been delayed because of the pandemic and all of that. So yeah, it was just really shocking. And as you can imagine, it's a very stressful and anxiety-inducing process because ultimately there is no 100% guarantee that applicants will have their visa approved. And if you're not approved, then you're not allowed to re-enter into the United States. So of course that's really stressful for a lot of people, including my husband, who like their whole lives are already in the United States and they may or may not have family in Mexico to help them if that does happen. And if they do get stranded, like, entering back into the United States illegally is way harder now than like 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, because of how immigration policy in the United States has evolved. Yeah, so it's like not really even something you can consider like people may have considered before. Not saying that officially stating we would not have considered that if that was an issue, but there are reasons why people enter illegally, right? And they're valid. So especially now because everything is so hard. So anyways, so we were notified. We had less than 2 weeks notice. And so we went to Mexico. My husband hadn't been there since he was a child. I hadn't been to Mexico since I was like 17. And neither of us had ever been to Juarez. So we were there for 2 weeks while we went through all his appointments, which included like a biometric exam, medical exam, getting additional paperwork that we could only get in Mexico, contacting the consulate and different agencies and his lawyers for all the things we had to do, and then finally his official interview. And thankfully he did get approved and we were both able to return home. And so he will be getting his permanent residency, or he is a permanent resident now. So that is what happened, and like I said, it's a very anxiety inducing process, and there's just like a lot of layers to unpack about it. And it kind of like, not kind of, it, has to do a lot with like immigration policy and how the United States views immigrants, especially from Latinx countries and Mexico. So I made this comic about the experience and submitted it for this one newsletter in the LA Times called the Latinx Files. And that newsletter covers news related to the Latinx community in the United States, and they feature comics and art from Latinx artists. So they accepted it, and it was published this past week. So yeah, it's crazy to me too, because the particular newsletter this week that it was published in, there was, the main body of the newsletter was actually an interview with Edward James Olmos, which, if you're Latinx in the United States, like, I'm pretty sure you know who he is. Even if you're not Latinx, like, he's a very famous and prominent Mexican-American actor, and he starred in classics like Selena and Stand and Deliver. So it was kind of like a crazy, like, full circle moment, having like watched his films growing up, and then my comic being published alongside an interview with him in a newsletter made specifically for and about the Latinx experience in the United States. So it was just really, really special. It was obviously very emotional as well, because, the piece itself was emotional, but then people's response was very emotional as well, because I got like DMs and comments from people who had gone through that experience as well. And they wanted to tell me how they appreciated the comic because it expressed their experience. And like, some people had family members who did get denied, or they did get stuck for months in Juarez, or they were going to be going through that process soon, and it helped them feel seen. So it was like complicated, because I was glad that I was able to help people feel seen through the comic, and like that I was able to kind of like use it to process that situation. But it's also like, I wish that I didn't have the opportunity to make it in the first place, because nobody should have to experience those things. So yeah, but overall, I am happy that I was able to put the experience out there and tell that story, and I'm just like really grateful for the Latinx Files for featuring Latinx stories, because it really does mean a lot and has a deep impact, since like, historically those stories are silenced, and it can be like a part of combating those situations in the first place. So with that, I wanted to talk about how with that experience of having the comic published, there was also like feelings of fear and shame that accompanied it. And yeah, I wanted to talk about that idea of fear and shame associated with making art, and like how gender roles play into that. So the negative feelings that I had associated with the publication of this comic don't like detract from the positive feelings I experienced. I just want to say that. But yeah, I did experience fear and anxiety with this piece being put out into the world for a couple different reasons. And honestly, like, I should probably talk to a therapist about all of this, but I figured that, like, other people also experience the same thing when it comes to their art, especially marginalized genders. And and I definitely think that my socialization as a woman is a big factor into my experience. So I had fear and anxiety about two main things, I think, which they're kind of just the same thing, but a bit different and to different degrees. So that thing is the fear of negative judgment about the comic, basically. So the smaller thing was that I had a fear of potential judgment from the general public. Anybody I don't know who could possibly see the comic and take issue with something about it. And then the second group that I feared judgment from at a much larger scale was actually my family. And that probably sounds weird, but for me, I have and have always had a strong fear of judgment by my family. Aside from like my husband, or else, I wouldn't have married him. But yeah, mostly like older family members. And this is especially true when it comes to my art and my creative endeavors. So they actually didn't know that this piece was coming out. Yeah, but I didn't tell any of my family members, and I honestly had like no intentions of ever telling them. I also literally like have them blocked on my art social media because basically I don't want their feedback on my art, and like they're not my intended target audience anyways, so it seems like I don't need them to follow me. I don't want them to see my work because it prevents me from being able to express myself fully. And it's not like my family members are actively negative or hurtful or disparaging of like me or my art. In many ways they're very encouraging and supportive. It's just that like I think it can be harder for family to see you as your own person, different than like who you were as a child. And like I said, this is only like my older family members, and yeah, since growing up they're like authority figures over you, because like I have some of my younger cousins who do follow me because I don't fear their judgment like at all, because the dynamics are different. So like with my older family members, it's like there's this unique shame that I can experience because of them. And like most of the time they're not even trying to make me feel this way, but they're just like used to giving me their unsolicited opinions and advice. Or worse, I mean, there are moments when they are actively shaming me about something, but there's like this generational pattern and expectation that you don't really speak up about them making you feel bad, or like if you do, you're not really taken seriously. And I feel like this is cultural as well, and like I said, is wrapped up in like gender. With me choosing not to share most of my art with them, I avoid them having the opportunity to do that. But with the LA Times comic, that control was kind of out of my hands, even though like I didn't tell them, but it's still like a major news publication and I have no control over whether they see it or not, because I don't know what media they consume. Like, I mean, I was pretty sure that like a lot of them do follow like the LA Times on social media and like read news stories. I wasn't sure if any of them subscribe to that newsletter, but that newsletter would still be accessible to them. But I am proud of myself because even though like that's definitely something that I still need to work through, that fear of family judgment, I did still put myself out there with the comic and decided that it was more important for me to be true to myself and my experience than to hold back because of that fear. Not that fear was like wasn't or isn't still there, but it's kind of just like, I don't know, like I'll just deal with that if I need to, Yeah, so like I said, I'm still going through that because they did end up seeing the comic, but I haven't talked to them that much, so maybe I'll like update about that. But yeah, so like that fear of family judgment, and then there was also, like I said, the fear of judgment from the general public. So this isn't and wasn't as big for me, like I said, of my fear of my family's judgment, but it is still there. I feel like I generally have a pretty good, it's pretty easy for me to not care about what like strangers think, and that's kind of like why, even though it probably sounds weird to be more scared of my family's judgment, that I think that's why, because it's like, since my family is my family, like I actually care about what they think, whereas like strangers, if someone says something that I don't agree with, it's like, okay, it's easy to like just not care and to just forget about it because that person doesn't mean anything to you. Whereas with family, obviously, like they mean something to you because they're your family, and Yeah. So usually, like, if I ever see any negative feedback for something from a stranger, like, I really don't care and don't think about it. Yeah, but it is there to a small degree. So, and I didn't really think about this ahead of time, but afterward, when it did come out, and LA Times actually also posted it on their Instagram page, which is like, it was two parts to it, because it was like cool, because they don't necessarily do that for all of the art that is shared through the Latinx Files. They don't automatically feature it on the Instagram page. So I felt like honored that they did share it on that additional platform for more people to see it. But then I did get scared, because I knew that like that was more open to their wider audience as opposed to the specific Latinx Files newsletter, where people are subscribed to that, or they like seek it out more intentionally if they're interested in that kind of thing. You know what I'm saying? So like the audience is more narrow and more targeted, whereas on the Instagram page it's like anybody who follows the LA Times. They might not necessarily agree with it. So like from that, it was exciting, but it was also a little nerve-wracking, because I was like, oh shit, like more people are gonna see this, and that's a little scary. And there was some negative feedback, and like I said, most of it was like, okay, like, I don't know, I have this thing too where like on the internet, even though like I create stuff on the internet, I also like really don't put a lot of stock into internet like comments. Yeah, so it's pretty easy for me to just be like, okay, like whatever, if I see something that's like I don't agree with, or I think is dumb. But with that, because it was like a bigger deal, I did feel a little bit of that fear. And then I think that fear is mostly just like self-doubt and the fear of being like wrong about something, or not good enough, and my work not being good enough in terms of like, oh, maybe the message is not clear enough, maybe I should like, I don't know, just like thinking of like ways I could edit it, or just like, I don't know, you know. But like me focusing on that, as opposed to making sure that I focus on the fact that it was considered good enough to share on the newsletter and to share on the Instagram page, and like tons of people appreciated it and understood it, and it resonated with them. Yeah. And which is different, than like, not to say that there is no space for constructive criticism, and I definitely have like improvements to make with my art, but that's gonna come naturally, and I don't have to like focus in on that. I can like congratulate myself and feel proud of myself, and consider like my work to be good, even if like it didn't have the impact that it had. But it's like, I know it did have an impact because people were telling me that, and that is so unique, and not unique, but that is just like super special, and kind of speaks to the power of the piece, So just being able to kind of like let myself experience that. Yeah, so like I said, I feel like all of that kind of like thought process definitely has to do with being socialized as a woman, since women and femme people are like gaslit so much and taught to be small and doubt themselves and give precedence to cis men's opinions and view, because like that's what society values as a whole. Yeah, and I think that this self-doubt and fear of not being good enough, or your work not being perfect, can stop people from creating work in the first place, especially if you're of a marginalized gender. And I think it's important to understand that, so we can combat that and like decide to create and share our art in spite of that. And honestly, like our art is probably way better than a majority of cis men's art. Kind of like the idea of like that meme, of like male art being bad. There's this Los Angeles gallery called Junior High, and like they have some socks that say male art is not good, and I love those socks. So this idea is kind of like a meme, but it's because it's true, because male artists are the majority in the art world because of like patriarchy, not because they're objectively better, which is like obvious, but and like a lot of people are aware of that, but it's still honestly hard to go through those emotions and experience as an artist who isn't a cis man, even when you're aware of that. And I'm not saying it's like the individual responsibility of people of marginalized genders to change things, like, yeah, because it's not just because of us like not choosing to participate, but like I do think that I'm just trying to like say that we should feel empowered to do the difficult and sometimes painful work of putting our art out there and expressing our truth in our art, because like being true to our experience is more important than stifling ourselves for other comfort, because that's like something that I personally really struggle with, and I'm trying to like grow from that. Yeah, so I'm like definitely still working through that and trying each day to really remind myself of. So I just wanted to like talk about that because I feel like other people can probably relate. Yeah, just because like in a lot of ways I know that I still hold myself back a lot with my art because of all of that bullshit, all of those feelings of fear and anxiety and trying to like keep the peace or whatever. So yeah, I'm trying harder to reject that and speak my truth basically through my art, and I encourage anyone else to do the same. All right, so I'm gonna end that topic there, and I just wanted to end the episode with just a couple to queer media recommendations, and also say, happy Pride Month from a fellow queer artist. Yeah, I love queer art so much, and even though like I know a lot of people talk shit on Pride Month, and like other months celebrating different like minorities, because, and it is true of like the tokenism and exploitation of groups during those months by like corporations, companies, brands, and just entities using like the names of those groups and supposedly like showing support for them, just so to like save face and like make it seem like they're supporting them, when in reality like their actual practices, and like their owners, CEOs, and people, and historically like they do like the opposite, which is definitely true and a problem. But what I do love about these like months, even though like these different groups should be celebrated all year, it is really awesome to see them be highlighted during different times of the year, because like especially right now with like Pride Month, I don't know if it's because of like algorithms or people are just like promoting it more, but I see like more queer art that I don't normally see during the year, and I learn about a lot of amazing artists and media and just things to take in that I love. Yeah, so I am really grateful for that aspect of like Pride Month, where I get to learn a lot. I get to learn about many more artists and things to check out to enjoy. So I'm just gonna share 2 things that I have enjoyed in the past that I thought that you guys could check it out. Alright, so the first recommendation is a film. It's a 2012 film called Mosquita y Mari, and it's directed by Aurora Guerrero. It's a coming of age film about and by the way, like these 2 recommendations, not only are they queer, but they're like Latinx queer media, just because like it fits in with this episode. Okay, so the film Mosquita y Mari is about 2 Chicana teenagers and their feelings for each other after they like get paired up together for a partner school project thing. Yeah, and I'm gonna be honest, it's not like the most amazing film, but like I just loved that it exists because there aren't a lot of queer Latinx films in general, especially at the time that it came out. I remember I didn't watch it right when it came out. I think I watched it in college, but I remember watching it and just being so happy that something like that even existed. And I think like the subject matter in these films existing is important, and it's important for like things that get released out into the world. They don't have to be like super amazing because, you know, there's countless pieces of shitty like cis heteronormative works out there, and like a lot of them get like acclaimed even though they're like horrible, but that's like a different topic. So anyway, yeah, it was just nice seeing like these two characters in a film, because I never really saw that. Okay, and then the second recommendation is a book by Adelina Anthony, and it's called Las Hociconas. It's a unique format. There's like 3 different parts to the book, and it's described as a, quote, stand-up comedy monologue, zany characterizations, and sprinklings of performance art moments in 3 distinct solo comedies, unquote. Yeah, so it's like kind of like freeform, like if it was a comedy skit, like in paper, like screenplay type of thing, memoir. I don't know, it's like a mixture of things, but it's really enjoyable. I read it in college in like 2014. I don't remember right now when it was published. But yeah, I loved it. It made me laugh and made me feel like seen, and helped me at a time to see something that I had never seen before. Again, just like with the film Mosquita y Mari. Yeah, and it just like felt so good to read something like this, like I said, that I had never seen before, had never been exposed to before, and see like, you know, there's more to life than like what I've been shown. Yeah, and it was just like funny. Yeah, so that is gonna be it for this episode. It was a little bit of a shorter episode. Yeah, I really hope that if you listened and you haven't already seen it, you go and check out the comic that I did for the Latinx Files. Like I said, I'll link it down below. Please let me know what you think about the comic and what you thought about this podcast episode. You can DM me on Instagram, you can email me. If you're not already subscribed, please subscribe. The next podcast episode is going to be an interview with an artist. Yeah, and I'm recording more of those, so I'm really excited for all the interviews that I have for this season. Yeah, and if you're enjoying the podcast, it would also really mean a lot if you could leave a review on Apple Podcasts and a rating, and you can share it with people you think will enjoy it, or share it on social media, friends, family members. Oh, and in case you didn't hear in my last episode, but I am now doing like a visual aspect to the podcast, so I'm like sketching in real time. So if you're interested in having something to look at while you listen to the episodes, you can view that on Spotify or on my YouTube channel, and I'll have those linked as well. Yeah, and I'll leave our social media and everything down below. Thank you so much for listening this week, and I hope that you have a wonderful week. Thank you.